To the Point with Michael Williams.
From students and tests to security and charter schools, they're just some of the issues for the superintendent of the 10th largest school district in the nation. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tori Dunnan in for Michael Williams. Along with managing a $3 billion budget, the school superintendent oversees nearly 200,000 students. Superintendent, of course, is our guest this morning. Dr. Donald Fennoy is finishing his first year on the job, and we talked a little bit about what a whirlwind of a year it's been. What's sort of your takeaway from the first year?
My takeaway from the first year that this is an amazing community. Just personally, me and my family have had nothing but great experiences out in the community in terms of the school work. Our kids are working hard, our teachers are doing great things. We have accomplished a lot this year. There's still a lot of work to do, but the board is in a great place, and I'm really excited about the opportunity.
What has been the biggest challenge that you have faced?
I think, there's a lot of challenges. Right. Anything post-Parkland has changed our world completely. So meeting the mandates as described by the administration, making sure that we helped our taxpayers understand why we needed additional funds in the form of a referendum in order to meet those safety and security needs, but also trying to keep a focus on teaching and learning and giving our kids opportunities through our academies so that our kids have every opportunity in the world to do whatever it is their hearts desires post-high school.
Has it been difficult to balance that, focusing on education but also security at the same time?
Yes, it has been difficult because the expectations of what our community expected in schools changed after February the 14th of 18. And so we quickly had to meet that new demand. As a parent myself with kids in our schools, it just completely changed. That was all consuming, is how do we make sure this never happens here? And so that has been a challenge, but we have a great team and we've been keeping that work moving forward.
And speaking a little bit on the same topic, there's a proposal that's being debated in the legislature allowing trained teachers to carry guns. Yes. What do you think about this? So
our board, and I agree with the board, I'd rather have trained police officers in our buildings with protecting our kids. Our teachers have a hard enough job just teaching and doing regular discipline. The idea of them being a first responder is something that we just don't necessarily agree with, and thanks to our taxpayers, that's something we can avoid here in Palm Beach County.
I know that you've focused a lot on mental health and mental health services and creating kind of a team to deal with this. Will you describe to us how that works and how it's being implemented? So
not only do we have teams, but we're also providing mental health professionals in every school in the district and making sure that our school counselors have the time to actually counsel kids. You know, the counselors that were in school when you and I were there mostly helped us with our transcripts and graduate from school. We put so much on their plate. So it's a combination of multiple things, but not only do we have teams to triage if there's a crisis, we can send teams of mental health professionals out to schools, but we also are putting people in the schools in addition to maximizing the talent that we already have in all of our schools.
I've read where you have talked about students after school hours posting threats on social media, online, and you've asked parents to kind of crack down on this, but also talked about how it's been a burden for law enforcement. How much of a burden has this been in the past year, and what do you think of it moving forward?
It's a huge burden. I mean, thanks to Sheriff Bradshaw, all of the local police chiefs, our police chief, Frank Kitzero. So we have sort of a unified front on this. When these sort of threats come in, we take them seriously. If we are able to capture the person who has put these threats out, we will arrest them. And unfortunately, that requires a lot of law enforcement time, energy, and money. And so I have asked parents, check the phones, talk to your kids regularly. Don't allow your kid to sit up all night on the telephone, because that's typically when we find these threats come in, late at night when no one's paying attention. So I am asking parents to do their due diligence, to really work with their kids, because it's a felony. And I can't, and neither can the system, risk brushing it off. We have to take each one of them seriously, and there are serious consequences leading up and possibly arrest for kids who do this.
Have you seen a shift in how parents are interacting with kids in social media?
Yeah, yes, kids are talking about their parents being in their business,
right.
and as they should. You and I are both parents. That's our responsibility. However, what I also want us to help our kids understand is there's a life after you're a teenager. At some point, you're going to want a job, and you want to make sure that your Google profile is clean. And so, but back to the threats, we just can't tolerate. Another thing about this is not just the threats to do harm at a school, but a lot of the bullying takes place on social media and at night. And so we want to make sure our parents are aware, not only if their child is the person bullying people, but receiving those threats. Sometimes it's best just to turn it off so you don't have to constantly hear those things that are happening on social media amongst the teenagers.
Yeah, it's a different world. We didn't have to deal with social
media.
media.
We didn't have to deal with that.
So this is also the time of year where students are starting to take tests. And I know that you've talked about how you think there's too much testing, but there also has to be standardized testing in schools.
Yeah.
Where are we right now on that?
Well, right now, obviously, that's still a conversation in the legislature, and we are supporting efforts to reduce the number of testing. But in the meantime, we're moving forward at the end of the year, so our kids take a lot of certification exams in addition to the end of the course exams, AP, ACE, and we do exceptionally well as a school system. However, we do think moving forward, there's got to be a way to scale that back and still get the same results. And so that's something that we're all exploring, probably nationally at this point.
What would be the ideal setup, do you think, for testing in schools? Is there kind of a plan or a program you've thought about that you would like to see?
Well, I think the ideal situation, allows us to be able to keep track of kids, knowing where they are during the course of the year, so that we can make adjustments for them or get them the supports necessary. But it doesn't have to be monthly or weekly. There are other sort of informal, not so high stakes tests. I mean, I think the high stakes test at the end of the year, I had to ultimately become a certified teacher or a certified auto mechanic. So that's part of our DNA as a larger society. But just the frequency, especially with the younger kids, that's where I really struggle the most, is with our elementary school kids, because anxiety and not really fully understanding the totality of what they're experiencing. So we've got to figure that part out.
The governor has said that he wants to end Common Core. This is a big topic among parents. Do you agree with that?
I don't know. I think the struggle that I have with it is I won't be able to clearly answer that until I know what we're going to replace it with. Okay. The idea of making sure that all of our children have access to a high quality education matters. We're not competing against kids just in Florida. Our kids are competing on a global scale. And so we need to make sure that our kids are prepared to globally compete. And so I'm very interested in participating in that conversation and seeing where we land.
What would you see as an acceptable alternative to Common Core?
Well, we currently have Florida standards, which are, it's not the Common Core, but it's more of the Florida standard. I think that's still up for debate. I think it's really that challenge, because for me, my children are 8 years apart in my personal home. And so for my 10-year-old son, he grew up in that manner, and he's doing very, very well. So I want my daughter to experience that level of rigor too. I don't want the gap to be so wide, whereas he gets to take geometry in middle school as a 7th or 8th grader, but my daughter may not, if we change it too rapidly or too drastically, she may not be able to get that opportunity until she's in high school. Is that really fair to the younger kids? So we've got to figure out how to make sure that we can continue to accelerate kids and give them opportunities to move faster if they're able to, but also provide supports for kids who are just on that regular track.
And we've got to talk about this legal battle that you're now in with some of the charter schools. They're saying that you're discriminating against them by not giving them their share of the new tax money that was approved by voters. It was supposed to be for security and also salaries. Do you think they deserve that money?
Deserve is an interesting word. I think in our context, we went to the voters and were explicit that this did not include charters. So because we were so explicit and the voters came back with 72% in our context approving that, I think the will of the voters has spoken. Now, if the legislation changes, then we'll address that. But right now, we were very clear with the taxpayers when we asked for those referendum dollars, how we were going to spend those dollars. So I need to make sure that we spend the money exactly as we stated before we asked, so that we're clear on that. And if judges say we have to share some of that money, then we'll fight that battle. But right now, we told the taxpayers we were excluding charters, and I have to stick to that.
You've recently had a case where principal, assistant principal at Palm Beach Central were removed from their jobs because of changing grades. And also the same thing happened with another principal last year. What is going on with that?
So, these cases are obviously still being investigated. So I can't speak specifically to it. But we are doing our due diligence to make sure that we're being transparent and clear with these investigations and the outcomes. Part of the removal of a principal is really just a process. It does not mean that person is guilty or innocent. It's just we like to remove them from the process so we can thoroughly investigate. And once that investigation is complete, we will release that to the media.
Okay. School district is also, we know, working on efforts to try to recruit teachers from other states. and bring them here to Florida and retain them.
Yes.
How are you doing that as far as salaries go and finding, you know, really teachers who fit the bill and who would stay here and not move on?
Well, again, thanks to the taxpayers, part of our referendum was to ask for money to give retention supplements to our teachers. Those retention supplements, which are anyone at the beginning of their teaching profession would get $1,000. Anyone who has at least 5 years experience would get an additional $5,000 annually for 4 years of the referendum. And anyone with 10 years plus would get $10,000. Well, that's also been very attractive to other teachers in other communities who may not have that privilege where they live. And so we're seeing an increase in the number of people that are applying for our jobs locally. It affords us the opportunity to be very selective in who we allow to teach our kids. So again, thank you to the taxpayers for putting us in a position where we are very competitive in that arena.
We've talked a lot about what's happened in the past year. Moving forward, as you know, we're getting ready to go into the summer, what is going to be different next year when kids get back to school? Kind of like the big things, because there's probably a lot.
The big things will be, again, continuing to increase our focus on safety and security and mental health. So, you know, it's only been a year since we've been asked to do all this. And we've done a lot. We've now hired close to 71 additional police officers. We do have a police officer in every school in our district. I think what they will see different is now a more intense, strategic focus on making sure that their entire well-being is taken care of. So having mental health professionals with programming and curriculum to really to reach out to kids and make sure they're connected. The elementary school model is very fascinating because we're starting to see the sort of trauma even in the early ages, and not to mention what's happening in the high school. So that's a big difference. I think also we have a great rhythm and we're trying to become more consistent in our practices. I think that also our kids and families will see more opportunities and options for their kids. We're really, really proud and continue to grow our choice options. So for kids who like computers, there are programs, the arts. We're increasing the arts programming across the county. So there's just so many great opportunities here for our kids to take advantage of.
Thanks so much for coming in. I know you're busy right now trying to wrap everything up.
Yes, ma'am.
We appreciate it.
Thank you
for
so
your
much.
Time. All right,
Absolutely.
appreciate it. All right, so coming up next, could offshore oil drilling become an issue in next year's elections? Our roundtable is taking on that and much more. Now for our roundtable with Mariana Mancuso, a Republican political strategist, and News Channel 5 political analyst Brian Crowley. So let's talk about the Florida legislature talking about legislation that would allow teachers who are trained to carry guns in the classroom. How big of an issue do you think this will be?
I hope it's not a big issue. As a part-time adjunct faculty at a local university here, the last thing I want to think about with my books being carried in my backpack, but also to have to carry a gun. I don't really think that that's necessarily going to save us should there be another issue with mass shooting on school campuses, high schools, middle school, whatever. You know, it's just not something that I think teachers are really prepared for. The training that goes into being able to shoot in that type of situation is extremely crucial.
You know, I think sometimes we reach too fast for what we think is the easy solution. You know, the more complicated solution is dealing with the mental health issues of people like that who do these mass shootings. I would note as an aside that the issue at Parkland wasn't that there wasn't anybody around with a gun. You know, there were deputies there who had guns and were trained, and you know, even if the deputies had done everything correctly, some people would have been killed in that shooting. That's what unfortunately happens in those things. So, you know, to hand a teacher a gun is not it isn't as simple as that. People who are in the military, police officers, people who carry guns all the time as part of their job, they're trained all the time. They're not just trained once and they stop. It's a constant training, and also they're usually in situations where they have to decide whether or not to use a gun. So to have a teacher that may sit there month after month, year after year with a gun that they never use, and then suddenly you have this emergency, you're asking a lot of that individual.
Yeah.
Do you feel like this issue is going to be talked about a lot, though, in the election, or?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's an easy hot button issue for people, and I understand those people who believe that it's part of the solution. You know, people are desperate to find solutions for these horrifying mass shootings, and I'm completely sympathetic with that, but It also calls for people in the legislature and people running for elected office. They're the ones that have to be calm in those situations and to study the issue and to come up with what they believe are the best solutions, not the quick and easy solutions. But yeah, I absolutely think it'll be part of the election.
But if it is, I think it's important to note that if we're going to talk about arming teachers and we're going to talk about bringing more guns into the mix, let's congruently talk about mental health issues as well. I think that needs to be brought forward as well. You can't just sit there and talk, oh, let's arm teachers and that will solve the problem. Let's also talk about the mental health component on all aspects.
Do you, as far as the issues go in the election, do you consider arming teachers at the top of the list? Or,
I hope not.
Or somewhere in the middle? I mean, I know it's hard to predict the future.
Yeah, I don't think it
Well,
would
sadly,
be.
part of it will depend on the timing of the next mass shooting. You know, if you have, if we go a long period of time between now and Election Day where there isn't another episode, we tend to push things in the back burner. Even now, you know, we've had subsequent mass shootings, and they're basically becoming secondary stories for people now. We're kind of sadly getting used to it. If we have a mass shooting within close proximity to an election, I think that it will raise the profile of it again, and it'll be a hot topic.
Something big this week to talk about is news that the Trump administration is considering opening the waters off of Florida to oil and gas drilling. To make sure I have this said correctly, Senator Marco Rubio said he is confident when all is said and done, the ban on drilling off Florida's coast will remain in place. Let's talk about this.
Well, I think most Floridians are going to support the idea that they don't want to be sitting on the beach, sunbathing or fishing or whatever, and staring out at a giant oil rig offshore. I mean, Florida, throughout its history, has been vehemently opposed to any oil drilling off our coast. And I think the oil companies that want to do this may be tilting at windmills. They may have a difficult time getting anybody to agree to allowing that in Florida.
Yeah, no, and I think we're also still reminiscent of the 2010 Deep Horizon oil spill that took place in Florida, and I don't think that any type of drilling off the coast of Florida is really going to be great for the state, and I know that the governor's opposed to it, as well as Marco Rubio, Senator Rick Scott, and I think that if Trump decides that he wants to go forward with this, it's going to be very problematic for him to maintain control of Florida in this election.
Yeah. You feel like there are just too many hurdles to get to that point of him being able to do this?
Yes.
Okay, so this is kind of an interesting one. Last week, we had billionaire Tom Steyer, who brought his Impeach President Trump campaign, I guess we could call it campaign, to Boca. We've seen his ads on TV before. You already used the phrase, but was this legitimate or tilting at windmills? Well,
I do think he's tilting at windmills to do something like that because, you know, I think that his effort to impeach Trump is, I'm glad he's a billionaire because he's wasting a lot of money that apparently doesn't mean a lot to him with the billions of dollars he has. You know, if he really wants to help the Democratic Party and help them elect the next president, there are better ways to spend the money than pushing this tilting at the windmill notion that you're going to impeach Donald Trump. I think
they said about 120 people showed up to this event.
Yeah, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of effort. It hasn't succeeded so far. I think he needs to redirect his effort and redirect his message.
I don't think we need any more people calling for that type of action against the president. I think that I agree with the fact we should release the Mueller report, but I think what's really important is to draw that type of divisive speech and rhetoric is really not going to be helpful to the conversation going forward into 2020.
Do you feel like that divisive speech and rhetoric is going to continue on into the next election, or do you think it'll be calmer then?
To echo Brian's sentiment, he is just tilting at windmills on this, and I think that he's really going to need to find something else to go, a different drum to go beat on that.
All right, we've got a lot to talk about, but for now, we'll be back in a minute. It is now time for our closing comments. We'll start with the Mancuso moment.
Well, hats off to Senator Rick Scott for donating his first quarter salary in the Senate to disaster relief in Puerto Rico and other areas that have been affected by natural disasters.
Yeah, I think that's a very kind gesture that the U.S. Senator, former governor, is making. I just got to say that, last week I was really excited, and I've seen lots of rocket launches out of Cape Canaveral, but I have to say the SpaceX that went up on last week, it was fascinating to see.
Were you there?
No, I wasn't there, but I could see it from my home in Palm Beach Gardens. I could see the plume, and that's how we had good clear skies, thanks to the weatherman. And also it was really cool watching the video of the boosters landing on the pads, and it just sort of a reminder of the great history Florida has in the space industry, and it's glad to see that we're seem to be rocketing again.
Okay. All right, something positive to end on there, right? Okay, thank you for spending time with us on today's To The Point. If you'd like to send us your comments about today's broadcast, go to WPTV.com and click on the To The Point page, and you'll see a section to send us your views. Have a great day.